Morning, everyone. Right. Well, good morning. I just want to say, look, appreciate you guys for joining us today. I know how demanding manufacturing environments are right now, so I appreciate you all for making the time today. This, just to let you know, today isn't about abstract AI theory. It's not about replacing people or ripping out systems you spent years building, right? The idea of today is to make sure that you have something far more practical, and it ties directly into the title of this session, which is how Agentic AI is rebuilding manufacturing from the inside out. And when we say rebuilding from the inside out, we don't mean transforming your factories overnight. We mean something a lot more grounded, really. So sort of rebuilding how decisions are made faster, earlier, with more context, rebuilding how workflows, removing friction and bottlenecks across various processes you have. And the idea is we also want to make sure we rebuild resilience, so when something goes wrong, your systems respond in seconds and not hours, and ultimately responds in a productive manner. So we want to make sure you're not, as I said, replacing people, but multiplying the impact of the people you already have. And that's essentially what Agentic AI enables. Just before we dive in, I know there's a few people still joining, but just a bit of housekeeping to make sure everything runs smoothly. Firstly, this session is being recorded, so we'll send you a copy afterwards. So don't worry about trying to capture every point or screenshot every slide. You'll have the materials to go back through in your own time. Secondly, you're all on mute at the moment, and that's just to make sure we minimize the background noise, keep the audio clean, etc. Okay, and I'm sure a few of you probably standing next to a production line, so you know how that works if you're on a call. And lastly, I've got a question and poll session at the end. So we wanted this session to be as useful and as relevant as possible. So ahead of today, I kind of took the liberty of speaking with a number of CIOs, IT leaders and industry specialists across manufacturing, including some of you on this call who are familiar with me, and just basically asked what's on your mind when it comes to AI. So we took the most common and most important questions that came up repeatedly, and we'll be answering those at the end of the sessions. All right, so chances are hopefully some of those questions will resonate with you, and of course if you want to go into a more deeper or explore further, we're more than happy to pick up afterwards. So here's what we're kind of going to go through today, really. So we've structured this session to give you a really clear end-to-end view, not just of the technology, but of the pressures, the realities and the practical steps you can take next. We'll start with a quick intro, and then we'll go straight into the state of UK manufacturing in 2025, going into 2026, what's happening across the sector, what's driving the pressures, what that means for your teams and your operations. And then from there, we'll look at where AI actually is in manufacturing today. So not all the sort of marketing noise, but the real adoption patterns we're seeing across various sectors, and ultimately within the operational efficiencies, maintenance qualities, etc. And ultimately, we'll then take you through the core of today's topic, which is what Agentic AI really means for organizations, why now is the right time to start the journey, and what a phased roadmap actually looks like from human assistance all the way through to human-led, agent-operated environments. And what I will then do is I will go into why manufacturers get stuck, how to avoid it, just basically help you to avoid the pitfalls that typically people fall into when going on this journey, right? And then we'll bring it back to ultimately how we get started safely, how you deal with legacy systems, limited resource, just to make sure there's no disruption. And then we'll finish with the Q&A, and you'll have a clear sense of what's real, what matters, what's the best first step for your organization. So here's today's speakers. Firstly, I'll start from the left. So we've got a real good mix of people here, not just from a tech view, but this is Chris Huntingford, our Director of AI. So if you've ever seen Chris speak, he brings a huge amount of energy, also a really grounded understanding of what this next wave of AI can actually do in real businesses. And he'll guide you through the Agentic AI piece in a way that makes it genuinely click, hopefully. Then we've got Simon, who's CTO at Makutu, which is part of ANS. Simon's team is really hands-on with sort of engineering the reality, just from a conversation into practicality. He's the person who sees what happens when theory meets the factory floor, essentially. And I'm James Porter-Ben, an enterprise account executive, and I focus specifically on manufacturing. My job is just to connect the commercial side, the pressures, the ROI and the operational context with the technologies that Chris and Simon will be going through. I just want to let you know as well who's in the room, just so you get a complete view. So there's a really good mix of sectors: automotive, industrial, I believe manufacturing, obviously, energy, pharma. Ultimately, all of you guys will be experiencing different patterns and challenges, and ultimately be facing very similar situations. So now that we know who's in the room, let's get into the landscape you're operating in, and let's go and find out a little bit more about that, right? So the state of UK manufacturing in 2025, I want to start with giving a little bit of context, right? Just to make sure this is relevant. So does anyone recognize these brands, right? Most of us do, because at one point, every single one of these companies was untouchable. BlackBerry defined mobile email. British Steel was one of the largest steel producers in the world. Kodak dominated photography for over a century. They had the market, they had the innovation, and they had the resources to stay ahead, but the reality is they missed the moment, right? What's interesting is that none of these companies failed because the world changed suddenly. They failed because the world changed slowly, right? And they convinced themselves they still had a lot of time. Kodak invented, as we all know, the first digital camera, but didn't shift its model fast enough, and the market moved without them. British Steel saw energy costs rising and global competition accelerating, but didn't transform operations or cost structures quickly enough to survive. And then BlackBerry literally created secure mobile email, but underestimated how quickly user expectation would shift, right? So the point is that these weren't small businesses. They weren't underfunded. They weren't lacking talent or leadership. They simply couldn't adapt at the speed the world required, okay? The reason I'm bringing this up is I'm sharing this with you to make sure you understand that because manufacturing is now entering a moment of change that feels slow on the surface, but is actually moving very, very quickly underneath. AI, automation, workforce shortages, cost pressures, compliance issues, etc. None of these things are hitting overnight, but the organizations who are moving now, even in small steps, are the ones building long-term resilience. And the organizations who don't, they won't fail tomorrow, but they may wake up one day and realize the gap is essentially too big to close. Okay, so I want to reassure you, by the way, the reason you're all here as CIOs, IT directors, industry leads, is because you're already thinking ahead. You're guiding your organizations through an era where technology is no longer a support function. It's a competitive advantage, or ultimately a competitive risk. And the decisions you make in the next 12 to 24 months will shape where your organization sits in the next decade. So I just want to let you know that, right? I've got a quote here from Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, and just build on that point. So he's basically saying that the companies that stay ahead, aka the frontier firms, aren't the ones with the most people or the biggest budgets. They're the ones who build their own digital capability. So for manufacturing specifically, that means using data, software, and ultimately now AI in a way that's unique to your operations. So you're not just buying tools, but building capability that genuinely differentiates you, right? And that's exactly where Agentic AI comes in. It's the next wave of capability building. So helping organizations sense change earlier, act faster, and avoid becoming one of those companies I mentioned earlier that missed the moment. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at what's actually happening across UK manufacturing in 2025 going into 2026. So I've got some statistics here. These numbers paint probably a very familiar picture across the whole industry. None of you will be unfamiliar with, but I've took all this detail here, right? So firstly, you've got unplanned downtime. We're all familiar with that. 68% of manufacturers were hit by unplanned downtime last year. Now, that's not surprising, as I said to anyone in a room. Downtime is the moment everything stops, with production and ultimately output. And when plans get thrown out the window and the whole organization goes into firefighting mode, the issue is obviously downtime never arrives at a convenient moment, right? And it hits when you're already tight on staff, behind on orders, or trying to hit a critical delivery window, right? That then ties into ultimately losses overall. So it's no shock that as a direct and indirect cost of that downtime, it's now projected to hit around 736 million in the coming years across the entire sector. And it's not just lost production, obviously it's reputation, there's customer issues, It has impact on your OEE, for example, and the pressure it puts on teams who are already running flat out, right? So that leads us into the next pressure point most of you are facing. So rising costs. As we all know, this is increasing year on year. It's been pretty significant this year as well. And it's not marginal increases. We're talking 20 to 50% in terms of materials, labor, logistics, etc. And you've then got to factor in that you've got downtime consuming one side of the margin equation, and then rising costs squeezing the other, which means efficiency isn't a goal anymore. It's now about survival, right? You're being asked to deliver more with the same, or in many cases less. Across the board as well, as you can see, 39% of you were saying that regulatory pressure is increasing, and ultimately they're saying that again, that's not going to be news to anyone here, but it's a scenario where every change in regulation means more documentation, you're having more audits and more traceability, and ultimately that's more administrative work for the teams that are already stretched, right? And that then links into the last challenge, which is 62% of organizations are struggling with critical skill shortages, right? So this isn't a simple, we can't, I don't know, hire fast enough problem. It's a perfect storm, right? So you've got experienced people retiring. I'm hearing, you know, from the conversation I have on a day-to-day basis, fewer skilled engineers are entering the market, and a growing technology stack that needs specialist capability to run safely isn't there, right? So you've got altogether rising downtime, rising costs, rising regulatory pressure, and shrinking capacity to respond, right? So when you put these numbers together, the story is clear. Ultimately, the operation load is getting heavier. The people you rely on traditionally in terms of time and budget, the numbers and the margins are getting tighter. And this is exactly why AI is entering the conversation in such a serious way, right? It's not trendy. It may feel a little bit hypish perhaps, but because the traditional ways of working simply can't absorb the level of pressure the industry is now under, we're now at a point where we're having to adopt AI. So I have regular conversations on a week-to-week basis with CIOs, IT directors, etc. And over the past few months, a really clear pattern has emerged, right? A lot of you on the call are saying everyone is feeling the pressure, but for very similar reasons, right? These aren't isolated challenges. It's pretty systemic across leadership and across the industry as a whole, in terms of the conversations I'm having. So a lot of you are saying that we can't make decisions without full visibility, right? A lot of leaders are telling me that the hardest part isn't the lack of data, it's the lack of coherence. So information sits across legacy systems. You've got spreadsheets, shift logs, for example, supplier portals. Basically, nobody's getting a single real-time view, right? So strategically, this slows down the decision cycles. It becomes harder to spot patterns, forecast is at risk, and ultimately it's harder to get ahead of the issues at hand, right? And then we go into ultimately how that affects the workflows. They're saying that now the workflows are heavier than they need to be. So teams are talking about, I don't know, operational drag, not because the process is wrong, but because manual steps have been built up over time. That's creating inconsistency, a lot of rework, and a lot of friction between teams. And strategically, that means your operating rhythm is slower than your market. So I'm just sort of summarizing essentially where all these areas are. And then, as I mentioned before, people are stretched and it's limiting improvement. So this is something that every leader brings up on conversations I'm having. They want to improve things, but the day-to-day workload leaves literally no air in the system because they're always firefighting. They don't lack the skill, but because they lack capacity, strategically that prevents organizations from moving from reactive to proactive, essentially. And with compliance demanding more than it's used to, we're now at a point where leaders are telling us that compliance isn't just a checklist anymore. It's becoming an ongoing operational activity. So there's more, as I said, traceability at the moment. And because data is not fully joined up, these tasks take far more time than they should. So strategically, it absorbs effort that could be going into areas such as optimization and innovation. And then lastly, we're only discovering issues that have essentially disrupted in the line, basically. So this comes up a lot. We find problems when it's too late to prevent them. They're saying without predictive insight or early signals, productive issues land as surprises. So strategically, this is killing the stability, and stability is the foundation of any improvement plan, especially when it comes to AI. And we're sitting on more data than we can act on. So every organization I speak to at the moment is saying, we've got all the data, but we don't have the time or tools to turn it into actionable insight, right? So strategically, that means organizations know more than ever, but can leverage less than they think they should. So that brings us into why these AI skills matter now, right? So bringing it together strategically over the next 12, 18 months, this is what they're focused on, right? So we've put all this together so the story's clear. They're not struggling because of a single issue from a manufacturing standpoint. They're manufacturing because these pressures are all compounding. And the leaders are having to run the business, protect the business, transform the company, and with fewer resources, you get rising expectations and fragmented insight. And that's exactly why AI is entering the conversation. Not as a shiny initiative, but as a strategic lever to restore capacity and predictability into the operation. Okay, when we look at everything manufacturing leaders have been telling us, the pressure and the skills gap, the operational issues, it becomes clear why AI skills are suddenly moving from interesting to essential at a board level. So I've put here labor shortages are driving adaptation, right? So nearly half of organizations we speak with are saying labor shortages are one of the biggest forces pushing them towards automation and AI. And this isn't about replacing people, it's about protecting the people they have. Manufacturers are facing an aging workforce. They've got difficulty hiring digital talent and an ongoing retention challenges because of that, right? So AI skills are becoming essential because leaders need ways to give teams leverage and to basically scale their capability without necessarily scaling headcount, right? And this is the same pattern we're seeing in the US, Germany, Japan. So AI isn't eliminating roles, it's filling the capacity gap that the labor market simply can't at the present moment, right? And then we're seeing a lot of reduction from a downtime and increasing efficiency situation. So a lot of manufacturers saying that they're prioritizing AI and automation simply because they want their downtime figures to look a lot better than they were previously. And this is where we are at the present moment. We're trying to reduce the impact that downtime is having on the business in order to increase the profitability and margins, right? And what leaders are realizing that AI skills are becoming the backbone of operational stability, which is why 62% of all leaders are now saying they want to consider hiring for AI specific roles in the next 12 to 24 months, which is a pretty crucial shift, right? Because 5 years ago, most manufacturers were not looking at AI capability, and now the trend is internal. Building teams who understand your processes, your machines, your data, and your operational nuances is pretty key at the moment, right? So because AI actually works on the shop floor, it's not generic, it's shaped by people who understand the environment from the inside out. Now it's becoming crucial that those areas are aligned. In terms of overall situations, what we'd like to do is talk about why AI won't replace the workforce at the moment, because I think one of the key issues I hear a lot is, are we now going to be in a situation where people are going to be replaced by AI? That seems to be the scare tactic, shall we say, at the moment. And what I want to say basically is that the productivity gap is not going to change. It just basically means that the bottleneck in manufacturing isn't just technology anymore, it's capability, right? So you need to be able to modernize your systems, but without the skills to shape AI around your processes, you can't unlock the value. And ultimately, when a time where labor is scarce, downtime is expensive, and demand's unpredictable, the organizations that build AI capability internally are the ones who will essentially stay ahead. Okay, so across the conversations we've had with manufacturing leaders, one thing's clear: it's no longer about automation, it's about increasing the organization's capacity to sort of interpret and act faster than the pressures around it. Okay, so just to sort of give you an idea as to where things are at the moment. And as I mentioned earlier, when we look at organizations positioning themselves as frontier manufacturers, the pattern's pretty consistent, right? They're boosting workforce productivity by reducing friction, giving teams real-time support. They're connecting data across customers, suppliers, and enabling much faster decision cycles. They're stabilizing their core operations using intelligent automation to detect and prevent issues earlier. And they're accelerating innovation by using AI to shorten design and validation cycles. These aren't isolated improvements, but together they essentially reshape how the organization is competing at the moment. So at a strategic level, AI is becoming part of the organizational architecture and a capability that kind of touches productivity, resilience, quality, and innovation all at once. And with that foundation in place, the next step is understanding where AI actually is in UK manufacturing at present, and then we'll discuss why Agentic AI represents the next major shift in how manufacturing organizations operate. So I'll pass you over to Simon Blewett, and he'll go into the details on where AI actually is in UK manufacturing today.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so this chart really just shows the AI maturity sort of journey, really. So it's basically where organizations typically sit when they're adopting AI and what good looks like as they progress as well. So there's a number of these sort of maturity models, one for data, but this one for the AI side of things. So at the top, you've got that kind of those early sort of, we're trying to figure out what AI means for us. So that exploring AI capabilities and different use cases. So use cases, just a way that you can use AI. Typical signs, you've got lots of conversations, maybe not much action, some workshops, some vendor demos, strategy papers are always a good thing at this sort of level. But what they really need is some clear business use cases, assessments of like value versus feasibility. It's always a big thing when you're looking to do some a project or a use case with AI. Look at not just obviously the value is super important, but also the feasibility, because if it's going to save you a little bit of money, but it's going to take forever to do, or it's very highly complex, you've probably got easier sort of easier use cases to do. And then obviously that governance awareness, understands the impact of the governance, understand perhaps where your data is, how you're going to look at that as well. Dropping down into the second one, experimenting with different pilots, so AI pilots in certain areas. So things like we're doing small tests, but it's quite isolated. Sometimes it might be not centrally controlled. It might be like, I think shadow IT is quite a sort of popular phrase. So maybe one-off pilots, proof of concepts that maybe don't scale, might be quite exciting, sort of perhaps excitement mixed with a bit of uncertainty. Again, what you need there is you need a bit of a roadmap. Data readiness, because that's when when you want to start looking to move into scaling this, you need to get your data in order, and also those repeatable patterns as well. Getting if you get a good use case, you probably find you can almost cut and paste that into different use cases with some small adjustments. When you start to get into kind of sort of scaling the AI solutions, this is where you've said, right, okay, well, I've done a pilot, that's worked, we're going to now try and roll this out properly. So AI at that stage has shown you some return on investment, and we've got a number of these that have actually quite surprising, whether that is through saving time in sort of man hours for automation, or actually maybe find some deeper insights as well. So we've done one where we've used AI to start matching data links and uncovering like millions of pounds worth of funding and things like that. This is where you need a shared data platform. So where we use a lot of Microsoft technology. Microsoft Fabric is a fabulous data platform that will bring this together and augment it and actually integrate with a lot of the AI platforms. And then there's demand from multiple departments. So that's when they start hearing the good stuff that's happened, and then we start to scale that. Again, what you need there, as I mentioned, is data platform architecture, standard pipeline patterns. So again, it's like, okay, we want to repeat this, we want to monitor this, we need to audit this as well. And then you need a central AI team or a center of excellence as well there. Okay. So moving on to fourth, optimizing AI operations and governance. So we're starting to worry about risk, security control, and also cost as well. So this is the part where you need to have alerts, you want monitoring, you want compliance, you want security reviews, and I know that Chris talks a lot about sort of red team as well. Need for audit trails, and you want to move from that kind of almost that playground to reality, to that operational, really optimizing this solution. So that's when you start looking at ML ops, AI ops. So this is operational sort of platforms to manage and monitor this. Again, all of this is on the cloud suite of Azure. You have a model lifecycle management as well. You have an amount of policies, risk frameworks, and you have things like platform called Purview, which gives you that auditability from your AI model all the way through to your data pipelines, all the way through to your source data as well. So you can really get that lineage of the answers that you're getting and the automation that you may be doing, and why the reasoning all the way through. Okay. So then we move on to the big stuff where we're embedding AI into our daily workflow. So it's not a project anymore; it's actually part of how we work. So typical signs in here are AI in CRMs, HR, finance, customer channels, and you tend to find that there's a lot of sort of, well, not third parties, but providers of software have actually embedded small little sort of pieces of AI within their software. Automated workflows is a big one, and we're seeing a lot of that where it will actually automate something that a customer used to manually do. One of the projects we did was we had a customer that was looking at feedback surveys, so raw text from thousands and thousands of responses. Instead of doing the searches and doing some sort of some data analytics on it, what we actually started doing was running OpenAI to monitor and look at the responses, and actually start to look at themes and start to detect things like prejudice, or to detect even entity detection as well. So this is where you can get your staff trained, and your business teams are using AI self-service as well. So what you need then is obviously adoption training, change management, continual improvement, because if you're making changes and that affect your whole workforce, this is where you have to really be on top of that change management as well. And then the goal is achieving that AI sort of agentic AI capability. So it not only helps, it actually acts autonomously within control boundaries, obviously. So this means that the system can take actions, not just answer questions. AI can trigger workflows, give you resolutions, give you responses automatically as well. And you have different AI working with each other as well in groups. So you have to have high levels of trust and governance and testing in this, and it's only really achievable once all the other layers are strong. Excuse me. So yeah, that's the maturity model. So yeah, I'll pass it back to James.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, well, I'll just pass on to Chris actually, because I want to get into what agentic AI really means for organizations. So I'll let Chris take it from here.
All right, thanks, folks. What you witnessed there was me getting mic'd up, so thank you to my wonderful friend. I'm going to share my screen, James, so that you don't have to flick out slides for me. So let's do that. And you should be able to see that. Can you confirm?
Yeah, it's good.
Cool. All righty. So what's up, folks? My name is Chris. I'm Director of AI at ANS. And I'm going to talk to you about frontier firms today. And something I've started to find interesting about what Microsoft are talking about is this concept of frontiering. So yes, they've taken a verb, turned a noun, turned it into a verb, and frontiering is an actual thing. Now, here's the deal, right? At the moment, we are going through this phase in frontiering where we are human with an assistant. So we're using Copilot every day. Hopefully, we're using some sort of AI assistant. If you're not, you are behind, right? And what's effectively happening is that we're augmenting our roles. So whatever we do in our day-to-day, we've augmented with these assistants. Now, one of the things I like to talk about is actually in my day-to-day how I use M365 Copilot or generative AI and other tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic. There's many others, right? So I've got like a list of them. But effectively, me with an assistant every day, I'm plugging information into my M365 Copilot assistant. I'm talking to it constantly and receiving information back all the time. But friends, I hate to say it, but we're in a thing called the solitaire era of AI. And the solitaire era of AI refers to actually we are currently still learning. Now, let me ask you a question. Why do you think Microsoft included solitaire in Windows? And actually, they included it because it was to teach you how to use a mouse, okay? And that's really important because we're in a learning phase. At the moment, we are learning to prompt AI. But in the future, AI will be autonomous and will happen to you, okay? So we're in the solitaire era of AI where we're learning to prompt and talk to artificial intelligence through natural language and prompting, right? The next phase is really human agent teams. Now, that is taking kind of small groups of very focused agents and being led by a human. And I'm going to use a crazy term that Microsoft used. They call it an agent boss. So congratulations, you are now an agent boss. Your goal is to use much smaller kind of digital agents to your advantage and to augment your role as well. Okay. Where it starts getting a little more tricky is when we start thinking about actually how much more widely could this be looked at. So we call them human-led agent operated, and that's really where you have a single person managing more than like 3 or 4 agents, right? And that is happening more and more as we're starting to see. So in my day today, I use several agents. I use a researcher agent, I use an analyst agent, and many other tools, right? So I'm effectively kind of leading the way in which my agents engage. Now, what's critical for you is that these agents may become autonomous at some point. So what you will notice is that these agents start firing things in the background and acting on your behalf. We have seen this in automation, friends. So this has happened in automation, which is why we added a phase 1B, humans with intelligent automation. And a lot of us are kind of sitting at this phase here where we're trying to figure out like what processes we can augment. We're trying to figure out what processes will work best with AI, but we're not quite sold on the whole agentic AI thing, and that's okay. Please remember that human with intelligent automation is effectively digitizing processes and infusing them with AI. So we call that sparkling automation from the autonomous regions of Seattle. And effectively, these 4 phases are your walkthrough into what we would call level 500 or phase 3 human-led agent operated teams. Now, you're probably saying, wow, that's scary. AI is going to take your job. Well, a little bit. AI is going to augment your job, right? AI is coming for the uninformed. And I hate to say it, also the lazy. So what that effectively means is that if you don't want to use AI, you will have some problems in the near future. So my recommendation is to start with human with an assistant and then start moving your way up the stack as you go. So a very, very good way to start out is to start adopting tools like Microsoft 365 Copilot, Copilot Chats. There are many others, but that's a good way to begin. And then you can get your org moving through that process. There are a lot of tools in the Microsoft stack that allow us to do this. Now, obviously, we love a bit of Microsoft. That's what we do here at ANS. But effectively, when you start looking at the tools, there's a ton of these digital bricks that you can use to augment and go through this process really quickly. Now, I think we're a little bit stuck, and I was there for a while. I'm kind of lucky because I got to do my own thing for a little while. And I was stuck at this like enable Copilot chats and use Copilots on a day-to-day, but I couldn't really figure out, hey, what more can I do? And ultimately, once I broke through that barrier of actually augmenting my work daily with Copilot, I then started to think about actually what types of use cases can I start plugging into my agentic layer. And that started working really well. So thinking about these particular scenarios or particular problems that I was having in my workspace and actually augmenting from there. And I would recommend you guys do that, right? So start thinking where generative AI can help you. And in the manufacturing space, there's a ton of things that can be done in order to make your lives a lot easier using AI. So the way we see it here at ANS is we break it down into 3 layers. So we call it embedded AI, which is effectively AI that is embedded in tools. You've been using this for many years. So one of the earliest versions of AI, embedded AI, was actually in PowerPoint. And do you remember they had this one tool where you would make a slide, you would click on the word designer and it would make the slide look worse than it already did? That, friends, was generative AI in the very beginning. So it's not new. And what's effectively happened here is that we're moving out of this specific embedded AI phase into what we call extensible AI, where you can create your own specific agents relevant to your use cases. Where everyone's getting stuck, I think, is in this differential AI phase. And differential AI is really, really tough, high code AI that solves really difficult problems really quickly. Now, the deal is that this is typically in Azure. And when people talk about making LLMs or GPTs or ABCDs, that's typically in the differential AI layer. But friends, we've got to get better at adopting embedded AI. That is really the key thing here. So my recommendation, again, is start using the tools day to day on a very basic level. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to do this. So how do you get started safely? Well, there's a couple of things. I do want to tell you something though. We are very used to what we call deterministic solution creation. So we are very used to a pathway that's been pre-described for us. So as an example, you will go into Amazon, you will order a thing, that thing will then get dropped off at your door and there's a predefined set of steps that take place. So we're used to testing for those. But sadly, in generative AI, depending on your data and depending on your instructions and your prompts, you can end up with something totally random, and actually that may not be the answer that you want. So as an example, if my data was really terrible and I put in a really bad prompt, I might end up with an answer that says stoat. Now, nobody knows really what a stoat is, but let me tell you, it's a weird little creature. And actually, that is based on badly defined data and badly defined inputs. Okay, so what we have to learn to do is be better at defining the data and be better at defining actually what type of outputs we need through leveraging those instructions. Now, the thing that I always stress about is I'm like, AI solution build is very interesting. It's not the same as regular. What we used to do is we used to say, hey, we're going to make a thing, we're going to test it as much as we can, et cetera, et cetera. But what's happened is in AI solution build, we're fixated on the 20%, which is not actually right. That is the easiest part of doing it. And I say to people, actually, the real tough part is focusing on the 40 and 40 on either side, right? Getting your data right, which is a thankless job, quite frankly, and actually red teaming and making sure that data is correct and the answers are correct is also extremely thankless. Let me give you an example. Many moons ago, I deployed an agent to the World Energy Organization. It was a community-based project, not an ANS-based project. And what was interesting was that actually we spent about 5 days building the agent. We spent about a month and a half getting the data right and red teaming. And that was extremely important to us to make sure that that agent gave out real specific answers on that website. So there's a ton of tools that you can use and there's a ton of things you can do. And actually what Microsoft have given us is the ability to use these tools really decently and connect these tools up to make sure that we can build the most succinct and sufficient solutions to solve our problems. Now, yes, I spoke to you about embedded, extensible and differential AI, but actually each one of those layers is mapped to a set of tools which you likely have available today in your business. Now, think about this as in a second. If you start thinking about where you would like to place your company on its AI adoption layer, are you just exploring AI? Is that something that you're doing right now? Are you experimenting? I'm finding a lot of organizations experimenting with artificial intelligence. And then finally, thirdly, operationalizing, making sure that AI is integrated into some processes, which is really where that sparkling automation layer comes in. And then finally, transforming. What is AI at a strategic driver across? Is it doing for you? Is it actually driving return on investment? And that is an extremely important process to go through. Don't start moving straight to level 4. Start thinking about actually how can we just explore and experiment first. So what ANS do is we offer a thing called an AI navigator, and that navigator allows us to leverage the tools in the Microsoft stack and get you going with artificial intelligence. The way we see it is that this is a great way to begin. If you see the navigator as kind of like the front of the ship or the light at the end of the ship, what will happen is that navigator will then guide you into the rest of the process of using AI. There's a number of options. So you can see we've broken it down between all the phases. My favorite one being the Copilot readiness piece. So it actually gets you ready to start using Microsoft 365 Copilot and gets you ready to kind of move across the rest of the stack. Another favorite of mine is the AI Innovation Lab, which we nicknamed Project Alloy. And what that lets us do is actually build out an AI agent with you that drives some sort of return on investment for your organization. So with that, what I'm going to do is pass back to James and say thank you very much to all of you. It's been an honor, and I have to get on stage now to present a bunch of stuff. So hopefully see you all very soon.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good one. Brilliant. Right, so let's get into the next section, really. Right, so that was really useful, hopefully, from your side. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat, and we'll take it from there. But I think at this stage, I'll go straight into sort of what gets manufacturers stuck, really, and how to avoid it, really. So we talk about areas like adoption, governance, and guardrails, and monitoring ROI and adoption, essentially, really. So the real reason is these areas is what I would summarize it as. So from what I'm seeing across the manufacturing sector, and this is across the board, food and beverage, pharma, etc., is there's not an issue with mystery. There isn't a lack of ambition. It's these sort of 5 patterns over and over again, really. So these aren't theoretical. These are the real world situations that we walk into when we're asked to unblock an AI initiative that's gone quiet, gone slow, or sometimes we get told it's gone sideways even, right? So if you've been part of any digital program in manufacturing, you'll likely recognize some of these straight away. So clear problems, well, there's no defined business plan, right? So what we consistently see is the team gets excited about AI, or the board says do the AI, you run a pilot, for example, and only afterwards people start thinking about the actual business pain it was meant to solve. So the result is the pilot maybe creates a nice dashboard, doesn't shift any KPIs. Execs say, yeah, it looks good, but what exactly does it solve for the business? And because there's no measurable impact, the funding dries up quickly, right? So manufacturers who get stuck usually didn't start with a specific production bottleneck. They didn't have any sort of downtime reduction goal or anything from that perspective, right? So they start broad, and broad essentially kills the momentum. And ultimately then we have unprepared data. Almost every manufacturing AI program we're asked to support has the same underlying issue. The data is not production ready, right? I did notice someone in the chat said with Satchel and Adela was saying basically it starts with data, not the software. And actually, now that I look at it, I actually agree, really, right? Because we see 10+ systems across sites that don't speak to each other. We see engineering logs in Excel, data with inconsistent context, all sorts of issues, right? So there's no single trusted source of truth. So often when we dig deeper, teams realize the model didn't fail, the data supply chain did. And until that changes, no AI project will scale beyond the pilot, right? And then, of course, we've got governance. So that's a pattern we see consistently. Teams move fast, compliance steps in, everything stops. Why? Because essentially governance wasn't defined up front, right? So we commonly find there's no model risk owner, there's no approval process for how AI recommendations become actions, as compliance teams unsure how to sign off model outputs, and ultimately there's no guardrails for data access or decision making. So decisions get stuck becomes stalled, that's it, end the pilot, right? So we now know AI needs governance as much as engineering change control does, right? So most manufacturers tend to add that too late, from my experience. And ultimately, when it's all done, you've got low adoption. So if people aren't bought in, the harshest truth is that if they don't use it, then it's basically pointless. So we've seen this story dozens of times. A brilliant model predicts downtime, for example, but maintenance still works from habit, right? A productivity tool is introduced. There's line leaders, they don't trust the recommendations. The quality model flags anomalies. So quality assurance still relies on human inspection. Why? Because nobody explained the why, right? The workflow of the benefit to operators, or the tool simply didn't fit how people actually work on the shop floor, essentially, right? So AI fails because it's not because it's wrong, but because the adoption strategy wasn't part of the design. And then lastly, people try and do too much. So they try and run too many different pilots at once. They've got one, rather than, I don't know, one high value use case, which they've proven scale, we see multiple pilots, teams already thinly spread, there's no prioritization, and nothing ever reaches production, right? So results are essentially, we look busy, but nothing's being delivered. So the manufacturers that break through are the ones who focus on that one specific use case that directly attacks, in some cases, I would say, like margin leaks. They look at scrap, downtime, yield, labor efficiency, and then they try and scale from there. And that's essentially why they tend to get stuck, essentially, right? So how do the leading manufacturers avoid these pitfalls? Well, the reality is how do we get it right? How do we put ourselves in a position to avoid these situations? And what's interesting is that when we look at organizations who consistently land the AI projects and scale them across multiple sites, they all score highly across these 5 areas, right? So this is the AI Adoption Index, and it's a very reliable predictor of success. So here's the truth. If you score low in these 5 areas, your AI program will almost certainly stall or stay in pilot mode. But if you build strength in these 5 areas, the probability of delivering production grade outcomes increases significantly, right? So we'll walk you through quickly what the highest performers consistently do. Of course, they start with a business plan. The leaders don't begin with technology conversation. They begin with a specific insight, as I mentioned, could be downtime, scrap costs, QA bottlenecks, for example. So they're crystal clear on the business impact first, and then this directly eliminates the first pitfall, which is there's no clear problem. So this is something that ANS look at as part of our navigator process in terms of helping you establish what that looks like. So everything they sort of build ties back to a measurable operational KPI. And then where others try and model on top of messy silo data, the leading manufacturers invest time in creating trusted data pipelines. They also stitch together production and maintenance data. So this stops unprepared data from ever slowing them down. And when a data supply chain is stable, AI becomes more predictable and scalable. They focus on one high value use case. So rather than focusing on 5 different pilots, the top leaders in the industry pick one use case worth, could be 300,000 a year, could be $1 million a year in business impact, and they get it right, and then they scale it, right? So this avoids the final pitfall, which is doing too much, and ultimately avoids organizational buy-in, because even the best organizations occasionally get tempted to go into sort of what I call pilot creep. So that means they're looking at different things in different areas. So realistically, when you look at what's embedded into workflows, clear governance and guardrails, leading manufacturers treat it like it's anything like process control. So they need clear model owners, risk approvals, and structured decision pathways. And this removes the start-stop friction we see, which is weak governance. And when all this is embedded into workflows, the idea is that they embed these recommendations into shift handovers. You've got a lot of quality checks, supervisors dashboards, and this directly addresses the low adoption rate. So if operators use it, value tends to follow. If they don't use it, nothing happens. So if you embed AI into rhythm of work, that's what will unlock the AI. And I've kind of drafted out really what the average savings are across the board. So this is what you'll be looking at from an EBITDA standpoint. So one of the first things it impacts, as I mentioned, is downtime. Not because it magically predicts failures or anything like that, but predictive tools do that already, is that Agentic AI connects the dots. It sees the vibration trend drifting. It also looks at last month's work orders, for example, or today's production schedule, and even the availability of the right parts. And then it gives a recommendation that's actually actionable in the moment. So instead of a team reacting to a breakdown, the issue gets steered away early, and that's where the 5 to 15% reduction comes from. It's the AI helping the plant stay one step ahead. And then you've got things like yield improvement, which is typically sort of 1 to 2%. And it's huge on a manufacturing P&L, but again, the magic isn't in detecting problems, it's in preventing them. So Agentic AI watches what's happening on the line in real time and all the things that normally cause variation. And then instead of waiting for a defect to show up at the end, it steps in early with a suggestion like, slow the line by 2% for the next 5 minutes, or hold the next batch until the material warms 1 more degree. Tiny actions made at the right time that stop scrap before it happens. And that's how these sort of typical numbers are achieved, right? A lot of the areas that come up as well from CIOs I see is maintenance cost reduction. So when you look at these numbers here and you're thinking, well, 200 to 700,000, when you look at maintenance, the story is quite similar. So they already have predictive insights, a lot of factories, but the bottleneck's always the same. Someone has to interpret them and fit them into a busy schedule, right? So that's where AI fills that gap. It doesn't just say, this pump may fail. It looks at shift patterns, as I mentioned before, open work orders, upcoming production commitments, etc. And then it suggests the best plan. And that's why maintenance becomes smoother and cheaper, because the planning and coordination happens automatically, not weeks later during a review, right? And then you've got workforce productivity. So this isn't about AI, as I said, doing people's jobs. It's about removing everything that slows them down, right? So it writes the shift summary, it pulls the right data instantly, it highlights yesterday's issues, and it basically drafts the maintenance handover. So instead of engineers and operators spending hours typing and reconciling information, they spend that time fixing the real problems and improving the process. And that's where sort of 5% in terms of labor efficiency increases come from. And then lastly, you've got compliance. So we're heavily regulated a lot. There's a lot of documentation. It slows teams down. So that dynamic changes because Agentic AI understands the rules as work is happening. So if a perimeter goes out of range or the system starts deviation note automatically, for example, if data is missing, it retrieves it, right? So if an audit trail is needed, it builds it from multiple systems. So the paperwork doesn't build up, it's created as you go. And that's what leads to a 50 to typically 90% reduction in effort across the board. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll pass you over to Simon around the Q&A, and hopefully he can go into some questions. These are basically questions that were brought up during various conversations in the months leading up to the webinar from individuals like yourselves, IT leaders, engineering contacts, etc., CIOs. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Simon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, James. So yeah, we talked to lots of different customers, as you can imagine, through different sort of verticals, but especially within manufacturing. But there was lots of overlap as well. So, so one of the questions we get is, where do most UK manufacturers realistically sit in the AI maturity journey? So, and also, what does it take to move up to the level? So, most organisations we meet, manufacturers included, sit around level 1, 2. They've experimented, maybe built a model, but it's not connected to operational sort of data or scaled. move up a level, the trick isn't just more AI, it's getting a small amount of data reliable, governed. I think Nick mentioned in the I'm a massive data fan, by the way. This is very much coming from a data angle with this. So when Nick mentioned about how data is the core of it, so absolutely. So getting a small amount of data sort of reliable, governed and accessible, and that's where platforms like Microsoft Fabric make a difference. So it removes all the plumbing work, so you can focus on the actual use cases and not chasing data around. I worked with lots of data scientists over the years, and they used to have the 80-20 rule, and if you're going to do some machine learning or data science, 80% of your time is actually cleaning the data. So Fabric and platforms like that, a central data platform, will help you with that as well. So once you get the first slice right and you can move on to level 3, that happens quickly because you've got repeatable patterns that you can start using across the factory. The other question we have is what's the 2 or 3 strategic bets organizations should make first when the budgets are tight? So budgets are always tight, and I think they're just getting tighter. So you tighten your belt and it needs to be even tighter. So the key to investing things to reduce that long-term cost and accelerate the value. So I'd suggest things like sort of choose one operationally meaningful AI use case, so something measurable and you can do within 90 days. Get a bit of a time box on that. And I think James mentioned about scope creep and things like that straight away. A lot of the time we'll set up a pilot, and after you have your kickoff meeting, you're finding that the scope's trying to creep. You've just got to get that nailed and understand what you want to get from that use case. And that's putting some lightweight governance in place early so you can scale it safely. So this is where things like Purview gives you a massive benefit for quite a small amount of effort. Purview is a governance platform that runs within Microsoft. It runs across all of the Microsoft stack, but in particular integrates with the AI platforms and services, and also the data platform and services such as Fabric. So then start consolidating, hopefully music to Nick's ears, start consolidating your data into a unified platform over time. So it sounds huge, it sounds scary, it sounds like it's an obvious thing to do, but there's a lot of companies and sort of organizations that haven't got their data in order, and perhaps they have a big SQL server, but then actually there's a lot going on here, and Fred's scripts are in here. Fabric's perfect for that kind of incremental approach, because you're not paying for a huge amount of license. It will scale as well, so you can try. I'm going to use a different manufacturer's thing from phrase, sort of scale fast, fail fast. So it's perfect for that incremental approach, so you can start small and then grow. Okay, so I've got so okay, well, we go for one of those. So let's go for do downtime, yield, labor saving figures come from real projects? So yes, they do. They come from some real projects that we're delivering right now in operational environments. So the pattern's consistent. When you start reducing the downtime or even waste even slightly, it quickly compounds. So ROI kind of stuff, ROI profile, if you like, typically looks like first 90 days you're proving the use case with perhaps a small data set. So that's when you may be able to get away with just getting a bit of a cut of the data. But as long as that's just you understand that won't scale, you need to do some work around that. Months 3 to 6, you start to integrate it into daily workflows, and this is what Chris touched on before. And again, without banging on Fabric, a tool like Fabric really helps speed up that step. And then once 6 to 12, you start scaling it across multiple lines or processes. Once you've got those patterns, you can start to then scale. So we see a lot of organizations see returns within the first year because the data foundation and that kind of operational integrations kept simple. And one thing that we'd say as well is with that automation, look for the savings in lots of different areas. So it is that labor intensive automation is super. It's an easy win, to be fair. Okay. So I'll do one last one on the data. So how clean and centralized does data need to be before you start? So being a data guy as well, I would say it has to be perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Not for or fully centralized, to be fair. Everything we do is cloud-based. Obviously, we pull data from everything from IoT devices. We've pulled data from drones taking water samples. We've pulled data from footfall cameras within a city. We pull data from good old-fashioned SQL servers, Oracle, real-time intelligence. We bring that streaming data from manufacturing devices as well, and using lots of even the older OT type devices where we bring in, we're using sort of lots of the, lots of different ways to pull that data through. So it doesn't need to be perfect. So reliable slice of data for the first use case, consistency of access, so you can keep getting that and getting that updated, and then some basic governance around it. That said, so the organizations who, to be fair, who get the fastest long-term value are the ones that start bringing their kind of key data into a unified platform over time. Again, banging on about it, but Fabric makes that easy. So that will sit along your own systems, and you can migrate only what matters and when it matters. So you start small, have an eye on the consolidation as the benefit grows.
Okay. Excellent. Appreciate that, Simon. I don't know if you want to go into these. We've got time, but I thought
I've got some time. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So yeah, I was going to say I'll stop talking about Fabric, but it's fabulous. So when Fabric and Purview are required, or whether the Navigator can sit on existing platforms, so Navigator will absolutely work for whatever you have: spreadsheets, SQL servers, on-prem servers, SCADA, ERP, MES, whatever you want. But if you want to scale reliably, onboarding multiple use cases, it's almost start with the end in mind, get yourself together, because it's not a huge, again, to set up some of these platforms, it's not, months and years and hundreds of thousands of pounds to work. You can get these set up, spun up really quickly. We have lots of patterns and we have lots of landing zones where we can drop in and spin these things up in a matter of hours and days for you guys. So yeah, it's great to have that in there. And if you want to start bringing multiple use cases, it just allows you to control your data access. It keeps your life simple for you and your team, and it gives you a huge advantage. Reduce the integration effort, removes platform fragmentation, and it just makes governance far easier. With Purview, that looks after the lineage of the data, it looks after the auditing, the control of the data. So Navigator will sit on what you have, but Fabric is a natural landing zone as you grow. I should do the last one. So yeah, how can you keep how can Agentic AI be kept safe with guardrails, human in the loop process and compliance boundaries? So it can be extremely safe. So the answer is Agentic AI can be extremely safe when it's implemented properly. The guardrail patterns, you've got human in the loop, so for any action that affects production. So we have Agentic AI that runs on a smart city platform. Again, it's different pieces of IoT devices. We interact with cameras in real time, we interact with footfall counters, we interact with door opening, environmental sensors and things like that. But as much as I would love all the footfall and all the traffic cameras to actually control the traffic lights and start redirecting traffic, you've got to have a human in the loop for that action, when you're having those actions. Certainly to start off with. The role-based access as well, so the agents can't exceed the privileges of the operator. So again, things like Purview, you integrate Purview even within your AI as well. So if somebody within your AI is asking for data that they shouldn't have access to, then Purview can help you define the labels for what they can and can't access as well. So you have policy boundaries to enforce the platform. So again, Fabric Purview gives you this straight out the box. And then I mentioned before that full lineage and audit trails. So you can show what the AI suggested, what the data it's used and who approved it. So having that audit trail, again, it's something you can turn on pretty much straight away. We've got all the best practices to help you with this. So the message is basically agents don't act independently. They act within the same governance and control and framework that your business already uses. So, if you have got a spreadsheet that you've tagged within, you put a sensitivity label on, that follows all the way through into that Agentic AI. So, the platform reinforces that safety. Okay.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I know we've not got a lot of time left, so I just want to quickly summarize to those left on the call in terms of who we are as a business, in terms of why we are able to have these discussions with individuals like yourselves, as we've been recognized as Microsoft Partner of the Year. across multiple categories, including UK Partner of the Year 2025 going into 2026, and which is only reserved for partners delivering at the very highest level globally. We hold the full suite of solution partner designations covering Azure, data and AI, security, biz apps, modern work, digital and app innovation. So you're in safe hands really from a practicality standpoint. And when we talk about AI adoption or agentic AI, it's grounded in a partnership that provides both the capability and strong delivery assurance. And lastly, just in terms of if you want to get ahead with our AI report, if you've got your phone QR code, it's basically an invitation to explore something we spend a lot of time researching. So these are the real barriers organizations face when they try to adopt AI, how prepared their workforce is for what's essentially coming or has already arrived. And it's based on insights from across the UK market. It looks at practical challenges leaders are dealing with right now. And we've created this report because technology readiness is only half the story. Workforce readiness is the other half, right? So AI succeeds when people understand how to use it, trust it, and can integrate it into their daily workflow. So if you're thinking about AI adoption or planning how to move towards more agentic capabilities, the report will give you a broader view of the landscape and the common patterns we're seeing, and you can scan the QR code and read it at your own time. So really appreciate you all for joining us today for this hour-long webinar, and we'll be in touch to get your feedback and to ultimately, if you've got any specific questions, go into more detail. Appreciate your time.